So today I'm going to be talking about a supplement that has come out for the non-profit security grant program. If you have been to one of my webinars, if you've heard me speak about the non-profit security grant program, you know it is a fantastic opportunity to get funds to enhance your church safety and security. And not just your church, this is a non-profit grant. So if you are a Jewish community center, if you are a nonprofit with an outward mission towards immigration, towards social justice, you are also eligible to apply for up to $200,000 maxed out at 3 locations, which means you can ask your state for $600,000 for security enhancements. How would that improve your ministry, your mindset, if you had those funds to enhance your security? So this year, the fund pool was $274 million. And many people were up in arms saying, Simon, that's around $25 million less than last year. Why have they done that? Well, FEMA recently announced an additional award, which for most states is going to close in January of 2025. So I wanted to talk to you about some of the significant changes that they have made. So you may have applied in 2024, you may have been unsuccessful, and if you have, do not fear, because there are these additional funds under the NSS category. Now, if you were successful, the state that I'm in, Minnesota, when they sent out the award, the SAA, the State Administrative Agency, they said, consider submitting your application again. So we're not going to go into too much of the mechanics of what the NSGP is in this video. However, I'm going to talk about the new classification. But what I do want you to understand is that on the 2023 data, FEMA said that 43% of nonprofits that applied for the NSGP were successful. Now, I always say I am not a betting man, but if I was, those are not bad odds. So if you applied and were successful, you should apply again. And if you are being told about the NSGP for the first time, or if you've been on the fence, definitely apply for these additional funds. And as I said, most states are closing this down in January, but there's been a lot of nuances, changes, and that's what we're going to dive into in this video. So I'm going to do a lot of direct reading here, then I'm going to explain to you what it means. So I started off by calling it the NSGP NSS. NSGP NSS, the Nonprofit Security Grant Program National Security Supplement. So here is who the grant is focused for. In the National Security Supplement, Israel Security Supplement Appropriations Act of 2024, Department of Homeland Security received an additional fund package to supplement the NSGP grant funding. $180 million of the funding was added to the fiscal year 2024. The remaining $210 will be awarded as part of the NSGP NSS. So I spoke to a nonprofit only a couple of days ago, and I said to them, it is very rare that a nonprofit hits this out of the park. So the National Episcopal Church is one of my clients. They are on 2nd Avenue in New York. They are opposite the Israeli embassy, high risk because of New York geographically, high risk because they're opposite the Jewish embassy. Not many people can demonstrate that level of threat picture against terrorism or extremism. So I want to come in and say no one hits this out the park. What you're trying to do is just get as close as possible to what they're looking for. So we do know that this supplement is for the Israeli Security Supplemental, the Appropriations Act of 2024. People say, Simon, what is the number one reason why people are unsuccessful with this grant? They forget this is a terrorism and extremism grant. They forget this is a terrorism and extremism grant. Remember, no one hits the home run. You've got to get it as close as possible. But these additional funds are under the Israeli Security Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2024. So here is what they have introduced this term, which is super interesting. I'm going to read this now. It says, interested nonprofit organizations sub-applicants. So if you've been to one of my webinars before, you will know that the state is the applicant, you are the sub-applicant. They say you must apply to the NSGP, NSS through their state administrative agency. They are the gatekeeper. You apply to the SAA. It says new for the NSGP, NSS, remember, specific to this Israeli legislation they created. Non-profit organizations can apply individually or as a group of sub-applicants through a consortium application. Now, this is very interesting. This is the first time we've ever had this language before. I'm going to say it again. New for the NSGP, so just for the supplemental funds, non-profit organizations can apply individually or as a group of sub-applicants through a consortium. Now, you might be a non-profit that could be a Christian-based school who doesn't have a very strong threat picture. However, you know to apply for this grant, you've got to hold 501c3 status with the IRS. You may rent your building to a Jewish community center, or on the Saturday, it's being used as a synagogue, whatever it may be. You may have other nonprofits that use your facility that could also be high risk. The church I go to in Minnesota, one of our multi-site locations, we open it up for third world country immigrants to worship inside our church because we use church on a Sunday. Many other religions practice on a Friday or a Saturday. So we have Somali communities that practice the Islamic faith that use our building. So the consortium is really interesting, and it allows you to perhaps demonstrate a wider threat picture. Because if we rent our building or allow a small Jewish community to use our building on a Saturday as their worship, and then on a Friday we allow as an Islamic faith to use our building on a Friday, the three of us together, a Christian church, a Jewish synagogue, and a mosque, are pretty high risk right now with people attacking our theology. So the consortium is really interesting. I spoke to a nonprofit a couple of days ago, and they were saying, I don't think, Simon, we could be eligible. We went through their risk factors. And I said, well, a consortium could be good for you because there is strength in numbers. So the consortium is really interesting because it's allowing people to group together and demonstrate a high risk factor. Remember, this is only unique for the NSS. This may continue in the 2025 notice of funding opportunity, but very interesting for here. They do allow you to do a consortium, and it may benefit your house of worship if you do that. So it says a consortium of nonprofit organizations is also an eligible sub-applicant. A consortium application is an opportunity for a nonprofit organization to act as a lead and apply for funding on behalf of itself and a number of other participating NSGP, NSS eligible nonprofits. Just what I said, this is a great way for you to take the lead and say not only us, there's others that have a risk factor as well. So something else that they've said, which is also interesting, is I get into the weeds a lot on this NSGP because by reading their literature and their documents, you can really understand what it is that they want and what it is that they're seeking you to say. And interesting, they provided guidance that, let me read this guidance when I'll discuss it actually, let's do that. So they then said the vulnerability assessment is different from a risk threat assessment. A risk assessment involves looking outside of an organization to determine external threats that exist that could possibly lead to security issues. Whereas a vulnerability assessment involves looking inside the organization for internal weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Now, here is what I find. People do not understand the difference between a vulnerability assessment a risk assessment, and a threat assessment. What they are saying here is the vulnerability assessment is looking internally at your controls, at your security practices, at your technology, finding those vulnerabilities, and then finding ways to mitigate those strategies. A risk assessment would be, Simon, as a Christian church in Chanhassen, Minnesota, what is the current risk of our theology being challenged by someone who doesn't believe in our mission and who might seek us as a target? So the risk assessment is an outwardly look at a specific risk or threat. The vulnerability assessment is your self-reflection of your controls and your program. The reason why I say this is that I find a lot of people outside of church safety and security, or those that perhaps do this grant alone without support, they may supply what they call a risk assessment or threat assessment. Now, the person who reviews this grant works for the state. They may themselves not really know the difference between a threat assessment, a risk assessment, and a vulnerability assessment. And on their checklist, they are just being told, Simon, I need to go looking for a vulnerability assessment. So if you don't supply them something that says vulnerability assessment, it might trick them. It might cause them to say, this isn't what we need, so we're going to disqualify this application. It's the first time to really express the difference between a threat assessment, risk assessment, and vulnerability assessment. Your document needs to be called a vulnerability assessment. Remember, the reviewer may not know the practices between risk, threat, and vulnerabilities. They could just be grading this application. So some interesting guidance that they gave us here. What they also said, and I see this so often, I presented to a group a couple of days ago, and I asked them to introduce themselves and tell me a little bit about their safety and security. And every person, around 30 people in the room, every person mentioned, we don't have cameras, we don't have access control, we don't have this technology. And instantly, everyone went to a Sunday and everyone went to technology. I like to talk about risk management more holistically than just a Sunday. I think the data is something high, something like 68% of church crimes occur during the week. And then what we also know is a very similar percentage for those that start in our church parking lots. So more likely you're going to be a victim of crime on a weekday, and more likely it's going to start in your parking lot. Why do I say all this? Is because FEMA released this guidance. In preparation to describe how they intend to use the NSGP, NSS grant funding, nonprofit organizations should think broadly and holistically in their approach to security measures designed to protect buildings and safeguard people. So they are telling us, you need to think holistically, Simon. You need to think broadly in your approach. Here is what they then say afterwards. Some physical security control examples include locks, gates, guards, e.g. contract security. They then say, although these may be effective measures, there are many additional layers to physical security that can help protect the organization, including creating comprehensive physical security plans, conducting training and exercises, e.g. active shooter education, identifying countermeasures against intrusion, e.g. access controls, preventing physical security breaches, e.g. enhanced security, doors, windows, and monitoring for physical security threats, e.g. camera surveillance. They say, although there may be effective measures, there are many additional layers to security that can help protect your organization, and they then go on to describe them. Why are they doing that? Because they are saying, here is what we're going to do to help you. Sometimes you get this wrong. Sometimes you focus on just technology, but there's plans, there's training, They don't just say training, they say active shooter survival training. Focus on their guidance. The clear message here, hey, nonprofits, you're not thinking wide enough. You're focusing on technology. What about your plans? What about your training? What about your countermeasures? They're giving you the guidance. Go wider than technology. There are many ways to enhance your program. And if you've listened to me for any great length of time, you'll know risk management. We're here to find the most holistic ways to close out the risk within your organization. I thought that's very interesting guidance. They also said, I've often heard mixed messages on this, but this was very clear guidance. And again, everything I'm going through is just about the SSS additional funding. However, it's going to help us when the NSGP opens in the spring of this year. And here's what I say. Here's another point. They say each state or territory, let me say that again. Each state or territory is unique in how they manage and administer the NSGP NSS. And I can tell you, I can attest that is true because each state has their own very strange guidance on this. It says, though, the SAA may require additional documents or specific application material as part of the state or territory's internal NSGP NSS application submission requirement. So I'm here in the state of Minnesota. We go into the border of Wisconsin. Wisconsin could have smaller details. They could have different details. Although it's the same form, the same process, each state can have their own internal guidance. We know that, but they're just reaffirming it. Here's what it goes on to say. However, when preparing the investment justification, that is really the heart of the form. This is where you're going to say, why us over someone else? It says that nonprofit organizations must answer questions completely, highlighted in red now for you watching the video, and cannot refer out to any supplemental documents as they are not submitted nor reviewed by FEMA. Let me say it again, it's a bit of a mouthful. Nonprofit organizations must answer questions completely and cannot refer out to any supplemental documents as they are not submitted nor reviewed by FEMA. The SAA only submits the investment justification, and in the case of a consortium application, the consortium workbook. So the SAA, your state, is going to grade your application. They may see your vulnerability assessment. You may have given them proposals in a clearly identified PDF to review. This is telling us that FEMA aren't going to get that. They're just going to get your investment justification. So there are two audiences now we're being told here. The audience is we've got to get through the SAA's review because they're going to grade the application. The second criteria is FEMA are then going to read our application and they only get the investment justification. So we have to be very cautious and comprehensive as to what we put in this application in spoken word because FEMA are not going to see our vulnerability assessment. They're not going to read any additional documents we might provide, such as proposals or bid for work. What is interesting there is that it's really telling us that the SAA, the state administrative agency, they have more authority than what they often let on. We had a case here in Minnesota where one of my clients was unsuccessful and they challenged the state and the state said, well, hang on, I just do a basic grade and I send it to FEMA. It's all down to them. We know that isn't the case. We know they have a lot of power, a lot of authorities. One of the reasons why I say make sure you're building that relationship with them. They are the gatekeepers of this grant. It's really telling us and conforming to that FEMA are just saying, hey, we just get the investment justification. The state gets everything. Really interesting. What they've also changed this year is the scoring and funding. So they've now added qualifiers or what they call multipliers. So let's break these down again. Everything I'm talking about is specific to the NSS, but it's really interesting because this could roll into the standard NSGP program for sure. and the new administration might change this as well. So here's what we say. Here's what we see different on the scoring and funding recommendations. It says, upon submission of your completed application, the SAA will review, score, rank, and every complete application it has received from eligible sub-applicants based on the criteria outlined in the NSGP NSS. This is the new legislation we're talking about now, specific for the Israeli-Hamas war. The results of the SAA scoring process will be forwarded to FEMA. Here I go again. The SAA make out, hey, it's not my decision, it's not down to me, but it says based on their criteria, the results of the SAA scoring process will be forwarded to FEMA. They are the gatekeeper. Don't let them tell you any different. They are the gatekeeper of this grant. FEMA's federal review focuses on checks to ensure the SAAs have done these things. If you're watching the video, I've highlighted them in red. If you're listening to the audio, I'll go through them now. So here's what FEMA do with your application. FEMA's federal review focuses on checks to ensure SAAs have followed the applicable guidance in their prioritization of projects. What does that mean? They must be given internal guidance by FEMA outside of what I'm going through with you today, which is public. Validating recipient eligibility, e.g. that a recipient meets all the requirements for the program. You've had a vulnerability assessment, that's a necessity to apply. Your 5013 status with the IRS in the USA. Validating allowability of the proposed projects is what you're asking for on their list. Can you ask for fencing? Is fencing on the list? Can you ask for lighting? Is lighting on the list? Medical equipment, is medical equipment on the list? They're validating what you're asking for is allowable. And then it says, and here is an interesting thing. I've never seen this before, super fascinating. And checking for any derogatory information on the organization applying. So your SSA may say that FEMA are a gatekeeper. I've been saying for 5 years that the SAA is a gatekeeper, and this new guidance confirms it because they're saying that FEMA are going to do these things. They're going to validate recipient eligibility, they're going to validate the allowable proposal costs, and they're going to check for any derogatory information for the organization online. That is fascinating to me, and I've never seen that before. They're going to research your organization, but it makes sense because you're receiving government funds. If your pastor has had pastoral sin, if there's been an embezzlement, if there's been any misconduct or lawsuits against you, does that change their view that you might be more susceptible to one of these crimes, or that the fact that you're just not in good standing so they can't lend you the money? There's no guidance online that I can give you as to what that means, but I've never seen this before where it says they're going to check for any derogatory information. It makes sense. Yes, absolutely, it makes sense, but I've never seen it before. So that's how I change the scoring and funding. Your SSA will grade your application, and if there's 60 applications in the state of Minnesota, they will determine which ones they put forward. FEMA are only validating eligibility, validating what you're asking for, and they're checking for any derogatory information. I cannot give you a stronger message that you need to build that relationship with your SAA. I've been saying this for 4 or 5 years. They are the gatekeeper, and this really confirms it. What FEMA have also released in this NSS is they released what they call bonus points. I like this now, for a federal agency to say, we're going to give you bonus points. So they've released this bonus points classification. And so let's go through this. Additional bonus points are added to the final scores of sub-applicants based on their service to disadvantaged communities. We're going to talk about what that looks like in a few moments. So if you are a nonprofit, the sub-applicant, the state is the applicant, you're the sub-applicant, based on your service to disadvantaged communities, you will be given 10 additional points if you meet their criteria. So let me read this in full. Additional bonus points are added to the final scores of sub-applicants based on their service to disadvantaged communities. To advance considerations of equality in awarding the NSGP NSS grant funding, it's great that they're looking at equality. FEMA will add 10 points to applications from organizations in communities identified as disadvantaged by the CEJST. FEMA would apply the Council on Economic Qualities, Climate, and Economic Justice screening tool, a bit of a mouthful. So the CEJST stands for the Council on Economic Qualities, Climate, and Economic Justice screening tool. Very big mouthful there. To each sub-applicant using their address of their physical location to identify whether a community is considered disadvantaged per the tool's methodology. So you can go to this tool and see if you're in or if you're out. But what we know from this guidance is that they will do this themselves based on your physical location. If your physical location puts you in a disadvantaged community per the CEJST, easier to say the acronym than the full word, based on that, you're going to receive an additional 40 points. The standard application is out of 40 points. So this is interesting. This is going to really boost those that have disadvantaged communities if they maintain the same scoring system. And I don't understand the application form to be different. So a real indication here, they're looking to do what? To give funds to those disadvantaged communities. Really interesting, disadvantaged. In their guidance, they're telling us what it is that they are looking for. They've also created some other factor considerations, which again are also bonus points. And these are going to be increased by 4. Now, these are very specific, and I'm going to go through each one by one. So let me first read what their guidance is. By a factor of 4, the non-profit organizations facing heightened threat resulting from the Israel-Hamas war, very specific language. Sub-applicants, you, the state is the applicant, you are the sub-applicant. Sub-applicants must draw a clear connection between the heightened threat they face and the Israel-Hamas war in their project narratives to qualify for this multiplier. Now, remember I said this again, not many people hit this out the park. Now, we live in a broken world. And we know that there's protests, there's extremists, there's a lot going on between Palestine and Israel and Hamas. So we know there's a lot of stuff. So no one's going to hit a home run to say that they've had a terrorist come in, a suicide bomber, an explosion, whatever it is. Still very, very rare results in America. We're still a relatively safe country. So no one's going to hit a home run. So we just have to say, how do we get close to these? So it says, a non-profit organization that can demonstrate a clear threat of violence, this is good, doesn't mean it has to happen to us or anyone else in America, but can demonstrate a clear threat of violence based on its actual or perceived views, positions, or advocacy related to aspects of the Hamas war. And let's go through a few more of those sections to what it says. Any non-profit organization that can demonstrate it faces heightened threat resulting from the Israel-Hamas war is eligible for this multiplier. Here's a great qualifier. Regardless of the organization's purpose, mission, viewpoint, membership, or affiliation. So what does this mean? As I spoke earlier, you could be a Christian church who worships on a Sunday. You allow a synagogue to use your church on a Saturday. It does not matter regardless of your purpose, mission, viewpoint, membership, or affiliations. The question is, do you face a heightened risk? If you're saying, hey, we're a Christian church, we wouldn't qualify for this, you may, if an Israeli organization is using your building during the week. There are other ways, but it's interesting that they've said, regardless of the organization's purpose, mission, viewpoint, membership, or affiliations, we are focusing on the threat picture. So now let's go through those classifications that they gave in their guidance. So these are receiving the multiplier by 4. They say a private secular university that faces threats from violent extremists that are associated with increased protest activity relating to the Israel-Hamas war, resulting in the need of additional public safety assets. They don't say college, They don't say Christian college. They don't say College of Engineering. They say a private secular university. They're very specific in their language. They also then say an Arab organization that has been targeted due to its ethnic affiliation by violent extremists through online hate, referencing the Israeli-Hamas war. Again, very specific language. Let's pick it out. An Arab organization that has been targeted due to its ethnic affiliation by violent extremists through online hate referencing the Israeli-Hamas war. No one is going to hit a home run here, but how do you get close? But very specific language. Let's listen to the next one. A Jewish day school that was vandalized by violent extremists seeking to commit attacks based on the Israel-Hamas war. Again, how specific is this? A Jewish day school. They don't say daycare. They don't say preschool. They don't say Jewish high school. They say a Jewish day school that was what? That was vandalized. A Jewish day school that was vandalized by violent extremists seeking to commit attacks based on the Israel-Hamas war. And again, no one really hits a home run on these. How close can you get to what they're telling you they're looking for? Here's the next one. An LGBTQ+I organization that faced violent protests during Pride events related to aspects of the Israeli-Hamas war. An LGBTQ+ organization that faced violent protests during when? During Pride events related to aspects of the Israeli-Hamas war. Very specific language. The next one, a mosque that has received threats of violence based on the worldwide unrest because of the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. A mosque that has received threats of violence based on the worldwide unrest because of the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. Very, very specific. The next one, a Sikh organization where a violent extremist attempted to access a holiday celebration due to the organization's perceived position on the Israeli-Hamas war. A Sikh organization, violent extremists attempted to access a holiday celebration due to the organization's perceived position on the Israel-Hamas war. These are very specific. What I like about this is, for me, I've called out keywords for you, have I not? I've keyed out the detail in what they've said, and they've given these examples. But here is the qualifier, because this is the federal government, and they have that, well, we're saying this is what we're looking for, but we're not really looking just for those things solely. Well, you know, there's a few mistruths in here, because here is what they say. I do like how the federal government operates. They said, these cases are merely illustrative and not exhaustive of the types of non-profits and conditions under which this multiplier would apply. For sub-applicants who can claim this multiplier, they must draw a clear connection between the heightened threat they face due to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East through descriptive examples of real-world situations to include, but not limited to, supporting documents such as insurance claims, threat reporting, police reports, and online threats. Note, this multiplier is specific to the NSGP NSS. This is the additional fundings for the Israeli legislative NS funding opportunity only. So why am I smiling through this? They say these cases are merely illustrative, not exhaustive. They've said a Jewish daycare. They've said an Arab organization. They've said a Sikh organization was targeted during their holidays. They're telling us, without telling us, this is where we are interested. So when they say these are merely illustrative, not exhaustive, they're very specific in what they are saying, right? They're very specific. So listen to what they are saying, read to what they say. Many people say, Simon, why is your organization so successful in this grant? We've been unsuccessful. We read the details, we understand what it is they're trying to communicate, and we focus on those areas. They say these are merely illustrative. I say to you, they are incredibly specific. So if there's an option to do the consortium, allowing multiple nonprofits to apply under one, does your risk picture get you closer to where they want to be? It's very clear guidance. They also say by a factor of 3 for ideology based on spiritual religious entities, e.g. houses of worship, ideological-based spiritual religious education institutions, ideological-based spiritual religious medical facilities by a factor of 3 for those qualifiers, and then by a factor of 2 for secular educational and medical institutions, and by a factor of 1 for all other nonprofits. So what have they done this year? They've added these bonus categories. They've added these high-risk groups that have this strong multiplier, and then they've said how they're going to multiply your application. Factor of 3, ideologically based, spiritual based, religious entities, e.g. house of worship, and then educational institutions by a factor of 2 for secular, educational, and medical institutions. Remember, this is a non-profit grant, not a house of worship grant, and by a factor of 1 for all other non-profits. So they're really telling us where they want these grant funds to go. So I've taken some time to go through the guidance for the NSGP NSS. The NSS is specific to the additional funds that FEMA made available in 2024. For many states, the time to go through this is now. The time to apply is now. The deadline is closing in January. You have a short window to get yourself ready. What do you need to apply? You need to have had a vulnerability assessment completed, because only things in your vulnerability assessment can you ask the state to be supportive of and give us funding for these areas. They are telling you in very specific language who they intend to give the funds to. No one, I've said this 6 or 7 times now, no one hits a home run here. How close can you get to knowing what they're looking for? If you have vehicle crime, great. If you got vandalism, great. If you got human personal conflict, great. However, what they're looking for are those that are high risk for Hamas, Israeli, and Palestinian conflicts. How do you get as close to that as possible? These things don't need to have happened to you and your church, but you need to demonstrate a higher risk factor. Now, if me or my team can help, we have helped nonprofits get over $13.5 million from this grant. You can see as I've gone through this, we read, we study, we learn, and we write your application. Not only can we write your application, we can also conduct your vulnerability assessment. The best time to do this is now. The second best time is January, because in the spring, there is going to be more funds that are going to be available for the nonprofit security grant program from FEMA. This grant has been established since 2004, and it's gone through very many administrations. Whether you are a blue or red, both sides have invested heavily into this grant. So with the new administration of the Trump team coming in, he didn't get rid of this grant the first time he was here, so I've got no evidence to suggest that he intends to get rid of this grant the second time. So he didn't the first time, so why would he the second time? What has changed? What we do know is that this grant has a 43% chance of being successful if you understand the grant and know how to write it. And again, my teams help people get over $13.5 million through this grant. If we can do your vulnerability assessment, if we can write your grant for you, I would love to come alongside your organization and make you one of our success stories. So for now, that is the NS application. Let me know in the comments, do you intend to apply? Was it interesting seeing breaking down the classifications, and can you get your organization close to those? Consider the new consortium that they have, a group of nonprofits. But for now, you stay safe, you have a blessed day, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.